Jeff and Jay here with another edition of Jay's Big Adventure. Jay's a fuzzy guy, and today we are upgrading the rear brakes on our BMW X5. This is a 2017 Xdrive 35i, and we're going to add some braking power by installing PowerStop slotted and drilled rotors. For starters, we're going to jack the car up on the factory mounting points, which are right here. We're going to use a floor jack and then support it with jack stands. If we were just going to change the pads, we would take these two bolts out here, one on top, one on the bottom, remove the caliper, and replace the pads that way. But since we're doing rotors, we actually have to take the bracket off that holds the brake caliper in place. Once that is done, we can remove the retaining screw that holds the rotor to the hub and swap the entire brake hub. We need to remove the brake sensor wire, and that just clips in to this retainer right here. Pull that down, and now you can get the wire connector out so we can disconnect the brake sensor wire. The caliper is held on with a 7mm Allen bolt. You pry the caps off of here, and now we can release those, and that'll let us pull the caliper out. Excellent. Now the caliper will pull right off. And those pads were not in terrible shape, but definitely time for an upgrade since we're already in here to do the rotors. Remember, whenever you're doing a brake pad replacement, we're going to push the pistons back up into the calipers, which forces fluid back into the reservoir. If somebody has added fluid because the light was on because the pads were low, if we push those pucks back in here, it's going to spray out the top. So on this car, to get to the brake reservoir, we just have to remove this plastic piece. Probably going to be hard to see on camera because the brake fluid is clean, but it's full. I had the brake fluid flushed. They refilled the container, and now with the pads being low, if we had pushed those pistons back into the calipers, that excess fluid would have overflowed here, and brake fluid is really caustic, so it would have eaten the paint off of the inside of the fender well, and long term, of course, that causes rust issues and other problems, so really good thing we checked. Just in case it overflows, I've got a rag to catch the spill. We're going to use this brake pad spreader to push the piston back into the brake caliper. When you do this, make sure that you leave the pad in front of the puck so that you're not pressing directly against the puck. You want to press against a brake pad, and that will help make sure that it goes in perfectly square. Remember not to let the caliper hang on the hose and the brake caliper wire. So all we've done here is just use a little bit of coat hanger to hold it up to make sure that there's slack in those lines. The next step is to remove the caliper bracket bolts, and those are E18s. With the two bolts removed, the bracket just lifts away. Now, with the bracket out of the way, we can remove the retaining screw that holds the rotor on. In this case, it's a 6mm. This is where we find out if the last guy knew what he was doing. As you can see, there's rust around the edge of that hub. Hopefully they put some anti-seize on there and this will come off. To start with, we're going to use a rubber mallet and just go around the edge. And if that doesn't work, you got to move up to something with a little more grunt. There we go. And now that's loose. To prevent this from happening the next time, we're going to coat the hub with some anti-seize. While we're in here, we're also going to look at the emergency brake shoes, and those look to be in decent shape. Before we reassemble, we're just going to wire brush the hub, get some of that rust off, and then when we put the anti-seize on there, it'll make this a lot easier to do the next time around. Before you install the rotors, make sure that they're clean. Most rotors are shipped with an anti-rust agent, and it's really important that you get that off of there before you reinstall the rotors. So we're going to clean both sides with brake cleaner. A thin coating of anti-seize will make this a lot easier to do the next time around. And it doesn't take a ton. I'm going to do a little bit on the face right between the bolts. And that should be all it takes. Make sure that you look to see whether the rotors are directional. In this case, with the slots, they are, and this one is labeled passenger side rear. Before we reinstall the bolts for the caliper bracket, we're going to clean that rust off. We're going to use just a touch of blue Loctite to make sure that those bolts don't come loose on their own. There's always some blood involved. We're also going to clean up the surfaces where the calipers slide to make sure that those glide back and forth. With the caliper bracket cleaned up, we're ready to start the reinstallation process. A little bit goes a long way. As you can see, we were getting pretty close. It's a good thing we did this when we did. Another week or so and we would have been down into the rotor, and that's always bad. Make sure that you look at both pads, because one of them has a clip here, and that clip slides in to the end of the piston on the brake caliper. If you don't realize that, you'll put the flat one in, go to reinstall this one, and it won't fit. Don't ask me how I know. We're going to reinstall the outside pad. The inside one is in the caliper, and now when you put the caliper back into place, they should all line up. Remember to add just a touch of anti-seize to the pins, because the caliper actually slides back and forth on these pins, and if they get tight, then it obviously won't slide, and that'll keep the brake pads in touch with the rotor. And obviously here in Salt Lake City in the mountains, we don't need any more heat. Remember, the brake pad warning wire has to go into the pad, and it just clips in place. Now when we install that pad into the caliper, that'll keep it where it needs to go. Yeah, or not. Okay, one final step once we have both sides on the ground is to step on the brake pedal several times to make sure that the pads are properly seated against the rotor. And that's it for this. That's it for this episode. That's it for this episode. Thank you so much for watching. Please like, please share, please subscribe, and we'll have more videos out soon. Okay.